history buffs, it's Nick Hodges here, and hopefully this will be the first in a series of podcasts that I intend to release every week when I don't have a video review out. Unlike my video reviews, which are obviously heavily scripted, this will be more off the cuff and improvised. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce a very good, an old friend of mine, Brian McHale.
Hey.
I just thought the idea of me doing a podcast by myself, even though I did already a few, is unbelievably boring to do. So
And a little sad. It's just
really sad. I mean, just for me to do it, I have to kind of write it sort of like a script, and it's really obvious that I'm not talking normally.
You're just staring at the wall.
Exactly, yeah. So I thought that this would be much more enjoyable to do. So anyway, I thought in this series of podcasts, what would be fun is to do a series where we talk about documentary series regarding history. I mean, I actually got the idea from fellow history buff, Joseph Compton. So he messaged me and he asked me, "Hey Nick, I have an idea for a possible future video. My experience with history classes were not so good and often filled with dull history documentaries. However, I do wish to go back and learn various points in history, but the History Channel now seems to be especially off with their new reality television shows like ghost hunting shows or endless World War II specials." Quite funny how he mentioned World War II documentaries, because I feel like that World War II documentaries are the most lazily made documentaries.
Right.
I mean, because to me, like, all they do is they just take stock footage and they just slap in some fucking voice over it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like really dumb. I mean, that's why there's so many that they churn out.
Yeah. I was still just amazed that there are still ghost hunting shows. I didn't even know that was a thing. That was going on when I was like 12.
You'd think that would be something that would annoy me more, but like I don't know what it is. You know, like how often do you need to talk about like the possibility of whether Hitler was actually insane? I think it was a documentary that just spoke about actually diagnosing Hitler on how crazy he was.
You have that combined with a whole 5 to 6 minute chunk in a half-hour special that is just talking about whether or not his eyes were blue. It's like, well, okay.
It's like, who gives a shit? You know, it's like
no mention of the Russians.
Because there's so many great periods in history they don't talk about. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. Back to what Joseph Compton was saying. So he says, what I thought might be good to see is a list of what you think are essentially great history documentaries worth seeking out and to expand on it. Also, maybe some books or biographies worth reading. So I thought that was a really fantastic idea, and I'm sorry that it took me a while to kind of respond and act on it. But I knew that I had to do a podcast because all these times where I just release a video review, it usually takes like a couple of weeks. That extra week while I'm working on an actual video review, that could be time spent doing a podcast. So Brian, thanks very much for helping me out with that.
No problem. Well, it's just, we were talking about this. I realized that I am the less versed in history of the two of us, but then I saw this as like a good learning opportunity. I'm like, oh, this is like catching up on my reading. It's nice.
So basically what Brian and I are going to do, what we're going to try to do in any case, is that so one podcast, I will recommend a good documentary series to watch. Then the next one, Brian will do the same thing.
Yeah, it just becomes like a recommendation series. It's like a back and forth where now I'm realizing we could just find stuff that we're interested in and then tell each other about it. So you're going to be the teacher and I'm going to be the inquisitive student. That's how this is going to work.
Yes, I'm here to educate. So the documentary that I'm going to recommend today is a program called Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is just a fantastic documentary series based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book by the same name. It kind of answers that question that we all had when we were younger, but it was politically incorrect for us to ask our teachers. Why did the white man rule the world, basically?
Yeah.
Like, what was the reasons for European civilization? Why did they thrive and other civilizations didn't?
Very important.
If we all started off at the same time. Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, because, the thing is, there better have been a documentary about it, because then you get too many people being like, well, maybe this doesn't have to do with any kind of climate or agriculture. Maybe we're just better.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, like in Victorian times, British people were convinced that it was to do with the genetic supremacy of their race's intelligence, that blacks and browns were naturally predisposed to be subservient to their white masters, and it was Great Britain's God-given duty to rule the world, as some other such bollocks. So,
completely ridiculous.
No, it is ridiculous. But you think that's such a complex question, requires a complex answer, but surprisingly it doesn't actually, Brian. I mean, like, contrary to what our racist ancestors believed, it was really just all kind of blind luck.
Boils down to pretty much location, weather conditions, right?
Do you have an idea? Got a theory?
That is the furthest my idea goes, is that as white people, we avoided the sun and we were able to get the benefits of avoiding the sun, which ends up being pale, sensitive skin and the ability to not deal with the sun killing everything that we could possibly grow. But that's the extent of...
No, I don't think so. Because just look at the British Empire, dude. We went everywhere around the world.
Okay, yeah, that's true. But but that's what I imagine. This is the extent of my knowledge, is that we had, early on some kind of agricultural or farming advantage that wasn't really possible in other locations, at least not as easily. We got an easy break.
Yeah, so you're sort of on the right track there. I kind of started thinking about this again because, like, sometimes I'm on YouTube. I'm just flicking through channels. Did you ever watch a comedy series called The Whitest Kids You Know?
Yes, I did. Did
you ever watch this skit where this kid is like explaining about the Trail of Tears? He calls it the Walk of Shame.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And the Indian, he got like a Native American actor. He's saying the line, and he's like, "We did not unite. There was too many of these tribes. We didn't unite." And the Europeans were in such greater numbers. And then finally goes, and we were too stupid to have invented guns.
Yeah.
Like, what?
See, okay, yeah, all right. So yes, that is the other side of it, of course, forcing our way in. Yeah, that's true.
But, like, you do have to ask the question, why didn't Native Americans invent guns? Like, why didn't people in Papua New Guinea invent great weapons that fire cannonballs? Or, like, how come they didn't conquer the world?
Right. Well, I mean, apart from that, they were just not that bad of people and they were just minding their own and had no intention of conquering the world.
But in any case, so I'm just going to give you an idea what this documentary sort of talks about, the highlights anyway.
Okay.
Because I don't want to ruin it all, because it's it is a series of complex answers, but I think it mainly has to do with just two or three things.
Right.
So you got 13,000 years ago, right, Brian, and humanity is like on an equal footing. In every corner of the planet, we're all like hunter-gatherers and living in very small tribes. Civilization was just out of the question back then, like, because every day we're just looking for food. We don't have time to think about developing a civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, hunting animals is long and arduous work and doesn't really give you that much time to think about anything else. So in order for large numbers of people to live together and develop civilization, a new source of readily available food is required. And I don't know how much you know about this, but there's one very special place in our planet that came into play. Have you ever heard of the Fertile Crescent?
Okay, see, now this is getting into more of those half-awake moments in history class where it's like, I that rings a bell, but with no answers. I have no idea what that is.
But you've heard it, though. You've heard of it.
I've heard the name, yes. I've heard of that.
Okay. When I explain this place to you, it's going to make sense how these civilizations started popping up.
Okay.
Okay, so in the Middle East, there's a region called Fertile Crescent where there grew two cereal grasses that forever would change the course of human history. That's wheat and barley. So that's, in my opinion, humanity's greatest crops.
Yeah, that is not a bad start. That's like, it's not like some outdated thing. It's like, oh yeah, wheat, barley.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, they just grew wild. So because of these grasses, small communities started to develop and they stopped being hunters and gatherers and became farmers. And when you're rooted in one spot and you're waiting between seasons to harvest your crops, that's the time when you can stop and think, because finding food is no longer a priority. So you start thinking about even better ways to produce even more food, and that in turn will transform your community into a village, a town, to a city. And when there is a surplus of food available, that allows some members of the community to not work as farmers at all, but develop other skills, start inventing shit, basically. So all around the world, other crops started being cultivated independently from the Middle East. So in China, you had rice. In the Americas, you had corn, squash, and beans. In Africa, you had sorghum, millets, and yams. And every single one of these places that grew these crops, that's where civilization started to develop. But the Fertile Crescent had a distinct advantage over all the rest of them. and that was domesticated cattle.
See, all right. Yeah.
And
this is a pretty easy break.
It's fucking blind luck, mate, you know? Because, like, of course, so they started using farm animals, of course, just for meat. Then they realized that they could be used to produce milk, wool, and hides, and finally even be used to cultivate the very land itself. So by attaching a plow to a horse or a cow, you can increase the productivity of your crops. But here's the kicker. Out of all the animals in the entire world, Brian, which is like millions of them, only 14 have ever been fully domesticated for farm use. Okay, so I'm going to read a list here.
Okay.
So you got goats, sheep, pigs, cows, horses, llama, Bactrian camel, Arabian camel, water buffalo, barley cattle, yaks, nitans, reindeer, and donkeys. Out of these 14 animals, 13 of them originate from Asia, North Africa, and Europe. And only the llama came from South America, which is the birthplace of the Inca Empire.
Right. That's exactly
so
yeah.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's why Native Americans weren't able to develop their own civilizations, because they just didn't have all these other animals that could be used for farming.
Yeah, like at that point, you don't really. It just makes more sense to be a smaller tribe, I guess.
Yeah, isn't it weird that like the one place in all of the Americas we have an animal, that's where the Inca Empire is.
Right. Yeah.
That one animal gave them that huge advantage.
Yeah, it's pretty big. I mean,
yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, I find the whole thing fascinating. So anyway, out of these 14 animals, the most productive ones we still use today, of course, are like cows, pigs, sheep, and goats. And all these animals come from the Fertile Crescent. So you think about it this way: along with the best crops in the world, you can start to understand why we see a domino effect, a great civilization spreading from the Middle East into Europe.
See, now I don't want to get ahead here, but it's also then when you talk about all that European disease that was brought to these other cultures that wiped them out considerably, a lot of that comes from, they had all these animals, they were farmers, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like,
exactly, yeah.
If you're working with those, that's where all the diseases are going to come from. Like all you need to do is like think about illnesses in general and go like, well, bird and swine flu, even just chicken pox. It's called chicken pox.
Yeah, exactly. Chicken pox. It's got smallpox. I mean, like you live with these animals from time to time. Of course, diseases are going to spread.
And they would just get used to it because they're farmers. They got to be around the animals.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when you come over to the America, they had no such animals. They had no natural immunities.
Yeah, can't handle that.
Exactly. And it's weird because like let's start with the Middle East. So you got like the great empire. You got like Egypt, the Egyptian Empire. You got like Persia, Babylonia, and then it starts to sort of like spread to like Carthage, from Carthage to ancient Greece, then Rome, and then you got the
great, amazing empires.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then you got like the Spanish, the French, the British, and it just sort of spreads from there. And a lot of these animals also came over to China, which also started developing. But the fact that they closed their country off, that's why they were like in a time bubble. And how come we were able to prosper? So the documentary goes a little bit further, like, okay, so us Europeans, we're doing so great because we got a natural immunity to all these diseases brought over because of our interaction with the Middle East. Okay, how come when we go to a new country, we weren't wiped out? But actually, it was the case. Like when the British, the Dutch, the Portuguese started going to Africa, we were the ones who started dying off, and the Africans were immune.
Really? Okay. Yeah, but see, I knew there had to be some give and take to that, but I didn't actually know like what was that we got fucked up too.
Yeah, we got fucked up simply because when we encountered these African tribes, they, unlike today, they weren't dying from malaria and other diseases from mosquitoes.
That's true.
Yeah, they don't have their communities next to rivers. And that's the first thing a European does is like have a town or like a house by the river, and rivers have loads of mosquitoes like buzzing around on top of it, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, again, this is part of the questions where people are a bit more ill-informed. Because I remember as a kid when they were telling us about like, all that kind of malaria and like all the shots you have to get to Africa. For some reason, I guess I wasn't clicking those together with then the European disease, where it's like, how do they deal with that? Oh, it must be awful there. And then the answer is, well, of course they would deal. They're from there. it's fine.
Yeah, but like, how come there wasn't anything like that with North America, for example? Why weren't there any diseases over there? And it's simply because of the animals. They didn't interact with these kind of animals, whereas Africa, they did have cows and pigs. I mean, like,
Right.
you got North Africa and then bringing it all the way down there. But I think it's mostly just to do with the mosquitoes. Like, they're the one to bring all these big diseases. And unfortunately, malaria is the biggest killer in Africa today. And that's because they've adopted European civilization, which doesn't work the same in Africa.
It doesn't exactly mesh.
Yeah, I mean, like, Africans don't traditionally live in large communities, and it reduces the chances of Africans dying from disease, and also inland and further away from water. But now they kind of turned a 180. And another thing is that because they didn't do that, communities obviously didn't develop into civilizations, and civilizations obviously weren't able to combat European aggression when we came over.
Right. Well, it's like I guess by having the abilities and then the time that afforded us to get more technologically advanced is interesting, because like you can't blame the other cultures for not discovering these things, and then you also can't blame them for not being larger communities. It just makes certain sense in a survival way to be this small, tight-knit community and have several of those, rather than trying to expand into this huge civilization. That almost seems ridiculous unless you're able to innovate and have all these technologies to keep it up.
Exactly. I mean, why do you think that Africa was the last continent to be colonized? I mean, like, we went all over the world. I mean, we'd go all the way from Asia to the Americas.
And yeah, and there was an attempt for Africa.
There was many times. The Dutch made several attempts, but we were able to colonize South Africa because South Africa is quite similar in climate to Europe. But once we started going in, then we were just dying like flies, basically.
Yeah.
The only way we were able to colonize them in the end was due to our superior technology.
Right. So it can't be, that's the thing, is when then you see this and then people are like, well, what about Africa? Like, no, they weren't just left alone. Like, obviously there were some obstacles, and that's the reason why they were not totally taken over. And
yeah. But it's so weird, like, just going back to the whole animal thing, that the majority of the animals that we still use today came from this one spot that also just happened to have these cereal grasses. That is the majority of our food. I think, like, in America, isn't like wheat like 40% of your diet, of American diet, or 50%?
It's pretty big. That's as far as farming goes.
Yeah, and corn is huge as well.
Yeah,
like, you guys are addicted to corn, because like I remember when trying Coca-Cola in America, and it tastes different.
Oh, because you had it with the corn syrup? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have corn syrup in it, and we have, like, use sugar cane for ours.
Right. Well, it was one of those things where it's like easier for us to do cheaper, which is always the way.
Yeah.
that is pretty much how it works, because it's like, if your climate is totally set up for this, it's like, well, screw it, we'll just make everything out of corn and it'll be fine. We'll have an entirely corn-based diet and we'll all live fine, which isn't, by the way, the best idea.
No. Oh, I actually have a theory as to why Americans have such an obesity problem, and it's not because you just eat so much fucking food. I think it's because so much of your diet is based on corn, which is quite fattening. So you got, like, corn in your soda. You feed your cattle corn.
Yes.
That just blew my mind right there. Corn-fed chicken, corn-fed pigs, like, eating cornbread as well. Whereas in the UK, I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, but, like, everything's sort of organic. Like, the cows just eat the grass, like the way they've always done.
Right.
When I went to Texas so many times, just how massive Texans are. Because all they eat is just, like, corn-fed cattle. It's just, like, fucking amazing.
I can't start speaking about this with total authority because I'm not absolutely clear, but see, all you have to do is take that leap and then realize that corn is effectively the easiest thing we can do is just constantly grow more and more corn. So if you corn feed everything, then what's going to happen is that products that aren't made that way are just going to be more expensive. So if you substitute a lot of things with corn, you get like cheaper things. And so that's just what happens. The cheaper stuff is what wins out. When you think about like, how is it that it's not just rich fat people, it's a lot of poor fat people. And pretty sure we have that nailed down, that comes from the cheap foods are really fat and they're made with all these badly put together things, and among which is a lot of corn product. Not necessarily that the corn is so fattening, but just that it's just a cheap way that they can get food in general, and then it's not going to be exactly the most nutritious.
But also how long it can last for.
Yes.
I think, so corn is originally from, Mexico.
Mm.
And that just happens to be the main crop used by the Maya and the Aztec. It's sort of weird, like every time you get like a really, really good, sustainable crop, that's where we have an amazing civilization. So like in the Middle East, we had wheat and barley, and the same thing with corn in Mexico. I think with wheat and barley, like you can store that for a while and it won't rot. So if you look at other crops around the world, they tend to rot quite quickly. So you are just working on trying to eat it as quickly as you can and to grow the next thing, rather than leaving it in a storeroom or something.
And then that ends up being basically the point of it, right? Just that you would then have these crops that are able to last much longer than anything you've had before. And now you go, well, now we can kind of get working on some other stuff. And then, of course, it's not like humans were destined to eat wheat as much as they were even corn. So like I don't think we were exactly meant to be farmers.
We just blind luck, really. Anyway, this documentary series has 3 episodes. One deals with the crops and the other and deals with geographic luck. Like, Europe is perfect for growing wheat and barley because of its temperate climate.
Right.
Whereas the Middle East used to be very arid. It's very arid now. It used to be much easier to grow these sort of things then. So then the second episode deals with conquest and the germs, that kind of thing. And then finally, the last episode is about Africa. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but I definitely think that this is a fantastic documentary series to watch. And it's they have reconstructed drama. I hate documentary series that just uses fucking pictures, and just has a guy narrating. It's just the most boring thing imaginable. I mean, like, if you've got the budget, like the History Channel should, then just, shoot a little film and have actors playing out these characters. It's much easier to invest in. My problem with these documentaries is that there are so many out there which are just absolute crap, and like they base their research on myths or outdated misconceptions from the past. Sometimes they just simply waste time not talking about anything at all. I mean, like, the other day, I was telling you, like, I was watching an American documentary series called America, the Story of Us, and I was watching it to kind of research for the Patriot Review. So it covers, like, the history of America from the landing of the Pilgrims right up to the present day. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily shit, because it's kind of hard to round up hundreds of years of history in 12 minutes, but I think it's pretty bad when you have a 44-minute episode and you spend 6 minutes just talking about how awesome America is,
Yeah.
I mean, like, just go on and on about, like, what I think about America so great is that our perseverance and just, like, such pretentious shit.
You know what? That's what's interesting is also, and where I'm finding, like, more potential for doing this and giving good recommendations for solid documentaries is because you do have to kind of look for them, because the thing about any kind of, like you said, they can be made lazily, which means they can be made quickly. And sometimes on channels, you have like History Channel, and they're like, well, we need new content. They'll just keep making things. So it's not going to necessarily have the care of like these really well put together series. So you have to sift through a bit to find the real stuff, rather than this kind of quickly thrown together. They don't even necessarily need to be the most diligent in their fact checking if they're going, well, this is just a half hour every week. And
well, yeah, but the thing is, though, Brian, that they try to make it more about getting ratings rather than just telling us what we want to know. I mean, like, with America, the Story of Us, they had people giving opinions who weren't historians. They had Michael Strahan, Martha Stewart, and Donald fucking Trump. Like, preferably, I would like to have historians give me an educated insight in American history.
Right.
Because, honestly, I couldn't give a shit what an NFL player, a chef, and a dickhead has to say about American history. You know what I mean?
Well, those are Americans.
All the shit they know is secondhand. You know, this is the stuff they were taught in high school, and a lot of the stuff that's taught in high school is outdated.
Yeah. See, you know what? What's going to be amazing, though, is now, speaking of outdated, I want to go back to this episode, like 5 years from now. Because you're already talking about stuff which is like, you should feel spoiled for even having that when there are shows like Ancient Aliens.
Oh, God. I despise Ancient Aliens so much. You know what I hate most about Ancient Aliens? They think that they say, like, you know, since no one can prove that this isn't true, it's probably true. Which is just fucking bollocks, man.
We could claim aliens were involved with everything.
It's just like, because they have, like, one, like, weird image of a god, you know, that looks like an astronaut. If you squint your eyes or whatever, then it probably is an alien.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one.
I have no idea, like, what's going on with that. And they even have, like, swamp people. Like, that I do not know what that show is about. I mean, like, can you fill me in? What the hell is up with swamp people?
The answer is I don't know, but I think that the solution is to not rely on the History Channel. Look, if you're going to watch documentary, if you're going to try and be taught on TV, you know, PBS is still all right.
You think so, Brian? I'm actually, I for the longest time, I had the highest regard for PBS, but now I'm starting to think that they are becoming overly politically correct these days. Like, they're letting modern times interfere with real interpretation of history. I mean, like, when I was researching for the Kingdom of Heaven, they did one about Islam and Empire of Faith. And I'm watching, I'm like, this is really good stuff because it talks about the Prophet Muhammad all the way from the beginning to the Ottoman Empire. So it's a big chunk of history, and talks about the golden age of Islam, where the Arab scholars found the Greek scrolls left behind after the Roman Empire fell and all of that. But then it came to, like, after the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate, when the Arabs conquered all the Christian lands that the Roman Empire had sort of left behind. So you got, like, North Africa, Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa. So, and there was a bit where they said how the Christians felt when the Arabs came in and conquered them. And they're like, well, they were fed up with the old regime and they were more than willing to accept this new religion because of how awesome it was. I'm like, I fucking know Christians. Are you kidding me? Like, Christians are the most protective of their religion you can possibly... There's no way that they welcomed Islam with open arms. They wouldn't do it today. So what makes you think that they would do it, like, you know, back in the 600 AD? You know what I mean? It's fucking ridiculous.
It's the same thing as they try to gloss over the idea that it's like the farther back in time you go, people are just going to be racist.
No, yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, like, people are racist. But my point is, and I'm not just having a go at, like, Islam as a civilization. I think that as human beings, we tend to be really cruel,
right,
in how we subjugate other people. I mean, just look how Christianity did it. I bet you that if the Mayans had, like, all the animals that the Middle Eastern people had, then they would be the ones who would rule the world right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the real answer, is that you can't just get all of the power as a human and then just be like, well, we're just gonna not take everything.
The fact that the political climate right now with the Muslim world is quite rough at the moment.
Right.
But they let its current global politics interfere with their documentary by making the Islamic world seem really super awesome when it wasn't that awesome for the Christians who are still living there. You cannot obviously tell me that there was a Christian out there who was like, oh, great, you know, this Allah guy sounds awesome. I'm going to go worship him now, you know. Screw Jesus Christ, you know, the religion, the religion of my forefathers. So basically, what I'm just saying is that when you watch a documentary, you need to ask, what is its agenda? Then ask yourself, have they answered a question? Have they explained something that doesn't seem biased? Do they have an agenda built by it?
It's kind of like a movie in that way, because you have just this ability where it's like, and almost to another level where you go, well, this is not necessarily going to try harder to fact check, because they're sort of let off the hook by going, it's educational. Like, people just kind of, it's that belief in, like, well, they are saying it and there's a narrator and this obviously must have gone down this way.
Yeah. So the reason why I think Guns, Germs and Steel works so well is that it doesn't have the emotional attachment behind it the way a documentary from World War II would have, or a documentary about Islam. It just gives you the facts and lets the facts speak for themselves. I mean, that's why I think it's so great. Anyway, guys, this concludes this week's podcast, talking about guns, germs, and steel, and about documentaries in general. Brian, did you have an idea for the next documentary we're going to have a look at?
You know what? I have to remember the name of it, but next after this, I'm going to bring up a topic through this really good documentary. I mean, it might have been a PBS documentary, one that I was watching, which is basically about Lincoln after death, because there's a really interesting story about that people don't really talk about. There was a lot that was happening just in the event that was the first assassinated U.S. president. So I'm going to watch that, and then we'll talk about that next episode.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that, because I know almost very, very little about American history. I mean, you think I would know, because you guys exactly haven't been around for a long time, only a couple hundred years, but
yeah.
So I knew nothing about this, so I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you guys for listening. I hope that this was at least somewhat educational. So until then, I'm Nick Hodges.
Brian McHale.
Thanks for listening.